how do we periodize? Now, what is periodization? I am sure you must have heard or read in your previous books and your previous classes that from 1785 to 1795, so in the period of these 10 years, now what is this periodization? What is a period? We will see that. We can show significant changes between different periods. So, periods, what we talk about period in terms of history, that begins from one year or one specific date to a specific date in the past. Period consists of one or more than 1 year of years. In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, he came and he published a book, A History of British India. He divided that book in Indian history into 3 periods. So, it was not just one document, one book. He divided that book in 3 volumes or 3 periods. What were those periods? The Hindus, the Muslims and the British. Why? Because when we talk about Indian history, it is not just 1 year or a span of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's a very, very long period in the history from one specific date to the ending of British era. So, first there were Hindus who dominated the Indian subcontinent. Then the Muslim rulers came in, the Mughal Empire. After that, India was ruled by the Britishers. So, these volumes, these books, the history of British India is divided into 3 periods. At that time, this periodization was widely accepted. So, when this method started, it was widely accepted and cherished by people. James Mill's idea of history was that British rule as the forces to progress and civilization. So, his idea of history about Indian subcontinent is, and the British led India was, that British rule, they forced us, they took us in the direction of progress and civilization. Do you agree on that? But there was a problem with this periodization process that James Mill offered. What were the problems that were offered by James Mill periodization method? Now, James Mill divided history of religious grounds under Hindu, Muslim and British. Is it right to characterize as age only through religion of the rulers at that time? For example, he divided into Hindu, Muslim and Britishers, which is based on more or less the religion of the rulers who dictated and who dominated India at that time. Earlier, there were rulers who were Hindu, so Hindu period. Then there were Mughals, that period is known as a Muslim period. Then after that the Britishers came in. That period is known as a British period. So, is it right? Because there are other factors also to consider in that part. Does the life, religions and practices of others do not matter? There were a lot of other rulers, other kingdoms in India, since India was a very big subcontinent even then, who did not belong to any of these 3 categories. What about them? Of course, they have left a mark on history, such as the Marathas, the Peshwas, etc. This periodization is not true and justified, and later on people tried to relate to it, but they just couldn't. Because variety of faith existed simultaneously in India. Apart from Britishers, there were also Portuguese, French, Dutch who ruled India at that time. What about their culture and their religion practices? When Delhi was ruled by Muslim ruler, in south there were rulers of other faith as well. Due to limitation of periodization offered by James Mill, moving away from British classifications, history have divided Indian ancient history into ancient history, primitive and old society, medieval history, transitioning phase, the transitioning period from the ancient towards the modern. Then we have the modern period associated with growth of modern forces, for example, science, technology, infrastructure development, agriculture, etc. Many historians refer this modern period as the colonial period. So, what is colonial? Now that we have spoken about colonization and the modern period was known as the colonial period, what is that? So, when the British came to India, they conquered the local Nawabs and Rajas in different kingdoms and parts of the Indian subcontinent. They started to establish their own rules and policies regarding trade, what kind of life would be lived by the people in that kingdom or city, what kind of things will be traded, etc. They started subjugating local Nawabs and Rajas. So what does it mean? They started to dominate those Raja and Nawabs, and their rule had to be followed everywhere. They established control over the economy and society. How did they do that? They captured the ports and modes of transportation through which people used to go and trade, and they ruled over them so that nobody else could practice those trades. They brought about in values and taste, custom and practices of their own land, their own culture, so that the Indian culture and the local and native culture would be subdued or overshadowed by it. We can say that they colonized India. They made small colonies of their rule. So wherever the Britishers ruled, those places came to known as the colonies under the British rule. So as this process started and developed with a high speed, this process was started to know as the colonization of India. So what is the colonization? The subjugation of one country by another leads to these kind of political conflicts, economic, social and cultural changes. This process is known as colonization.